Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Software Development Finance and AI podcast. Our guest today is Mike Foley. Mike is a repeat guest. We've had I had a great conversation with Mike, a little while ago. So Mike, thanks for taking the time. Mike is the CTO of Cause of a Kind. I'll let you give a quick introduction and we'll jump right into the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm CTO of Cause of a Kind. We're a digital agency that builds software for everybody else, software and websites for all sorts of folks. And of course, as we talked about, we're increasingly using AI. So I'm sure that is something that's been uniquely changing in our business. But I'm also a career engineer, and I still very much code every day and work on all the products and all that good stuff. So I'm very much a hands-on keyboard CTO, if you will.
Super. You mentioned hands-on CTO, and I know, that's what I want. I was hoping to spend some of our time on that today, but Mike, but maybe if not today, hopefully I can bring you back on to do a hands-on session. Uh, but here's what, let's get started with this conversation. Just a quick background to you and to the audience as well. Is, we've been meaning to do sort of an AI series of podcasts. I've had a lot of conversations with, other founders and CTOs in the last few months. But I want to sort of start the count at number one essentially and do hopefully 100 podcasts before the end of the year. I mean, that's amongst between everything else that needs done, it's a lot, but I want to set the number to be high enough. So at least I can, if I did 10, it's still 10% of 100, but I want to set the number at 100. And, I want to call this the first in that list. So again, thank you for helping us kick this off. And I think, I remember the last time we had this chat, it was wonderful, right? I think it was one of the lengthiest podcasts today that I've had. It was like over 3 hours. I know
Oh yeah,
today our time is limited to an hour, a little bit more than that, Mike. So I want to be respectful of that. Let's kick this off. Your initial thoughts on how development has changed in the last, I want to say, should we say 3 months? What do you think is a decent number to pick to sort of draw parallels?
Yeah, I would say about 6 months. Yeah, 3 to 6 months, I would say, because everybody kind of remembers when AI came out maybe 2 years ago or something like that. And for me, I got very wary of it as an agency owner because we had done the Web3 and we had been through all of that, and everyone was like, it's going to change the world and everything's going to be crypto. And then the whole industry just seemed to like collapse overnight. And we were super glad we didn't pivot our agency to being like a Web3 agency. So when AI first came out, I was like, wait, we've seen this before. Don't believe all the hype, all this. Now, 2 years later, I want to say like starting in, with the release of Cursor, um, you know, I would say that sort of kicked off this idea of like agentic editing. Um, when Cursor first came out, I wasn't a big fan and I didn't use it, but over time, the editing of particularly Claude has gotten really good. And so I'd say in like the last 3 months, and I want to say for the last 2 months for sure, I have not written one line of code the traditional way myself. My editor of choice is Zed actually, and they released agentic editing, and I believe it's just using Claude Code under the hood. And what an experience that was truly like the experience that jumped the chasm for me. And it's changed everything. I mean, I'm building features for customers so much faster than we were before, and it's so different, and I was sort of afraid of it, maybe I would say, when this first happened, and then I was like, you know what? Let's just embrace it, and we got to see where it goes. And so that's where we've been.
Okay, that's great. Let's talk about, again, there's a lot of learning for me along the way. I'm going to ask you things I know a little bit about, I know nothing about, and maybe I know something about as well. So you mentioned Zed here, right? Let's talk about that. I've not used Zed. Yeah, you talk Cursor and Zed. So for folks, including myself, who have not used Zed, why do you like that, Mike?
Yeah. So I was a big VS Code user for many years, and Krish, I know you're a big Ruby fan from our last talk, so you may not have been a VS Code fan because I know the Ruby community is not as big on that, depending on what school you live in. I'm also a big Ruby fan myself, but before that, I probably used Sublime Code. So it was like Sublime Text, and then VS Code kind of took over, and I switched to Zed without ever using agentic capabilities because it was faster. It's a Rust-based IDE. It was kind of heralded as this like mob coding kind of. It had these like pair coding features, but I never actually ended up using those very much, and they seem to have not focused on those very much. Cursor is built with VS Code. So it's an AI editor, AI enabled editor where an AI agent will take over and code for you and show you all of the diffs and all of the things that are changing, which I think is really important as an engineer who's trying to get into AI and move away from the copy and paste from your ChatGPT or Claude. That is like, when I was doing that, and people were like, this is going to change the world. I was like, I'm not going to sit here and copy and paste back and forth between two windows all day long. That's really where Cursor came in and was like, okay, we're going to get rid of that piece of the process and edit for you. Zed launched their agentic AI a little bit later, but it's a little bit quicker. Being built in Rust, the entire editor experience is a little bit faster. And it also uses Claude Code. So the thing that's a little bit different between the two of these tools is Cursor sort of had this idea that they learn your whole code base and they can figure it out and make changes based on that. I didn't find that to be super true when I was using it. I put it to the test, admittedly, in a pretty complicated code base because I said, look, I don't want to build to-do MVC or some like greenfield app. I put it in a legacy app, put it through the ringer, and it really was not handling it very well. It was kind of slow. It did all sorts of weird things. And so then I thought to myself, okay,
So wait, Mike,
let's,
I'm going to interrupt
yeah.
you. Sorry. So just so I'm following along there, right? So you said you had picked Cursor and you had picked a legacy code base, right? So you're not starting on a greenfield project. You had an existing repo and you started leveraging Cursor with that. So some of the steps there, what were the first reactions? Like at which point did you feel like this was not doing it, or what were the initial items that you noted that told you like, hey, maybe this might work or maybe this wouldn't work?
Yeah. So I'll give you, I started with things that were simple, like change this button. I need to write a script. And it was great. Like, initially I was like, whoa, okay, amazing. Then there's a piece of this particular code base that's somewhat complicated. It's a bit of it's like a rules engine. A lot of complicated code to this piece that I knew very well because I had designed it. And I thought, okay, if it can get in here and figure it out, because normally I'd have to onboard an engineer and I know how long that would take. And let's just see. And it really, like, there was great unit tests and everything. And it was just, it really struggled to figure it out. And it was creating more work for me. And what would happen is I would start prompting it and it would almost get it. Then I'd prompt it again and get a little closer. And then I prompt it again and it went off the rails. But then I keep prompting. It's almost like gambling where you're like, I'm going to win it back. And then before I knew it, I had spent more time trying to make the prompt work than it had actually been worth the time.
Oh my God, Mike, let me ask you two things. And be honest with me. Is it okay if I interrupted you as you went, or is it better if I let you finish?
No, definitely feel free to interrupt.
Okay. I'm very excited for multiple reasons in having this conversation with you. One is you're a wonderful person. That's outside of this. I'll tell you why I'm very excited. I've had a number of conversations with a lot of people over the last many months, and I've enjoyed every one of those conversations. But the difference here is I do not know, I could be wrong, if any of them were developers. You know what I mean? They were founders who were running the company, which is amazing, right? A lot of us are. But sometimes, no matter what we do, our heart lies in one place. And that's who we are as people. When someone tells you, I was at a stand-up show a few days ago in New York, and they ask you what you do, it doesn't matter what your current role is. Sorry if I digress, I had to give you this context. No matter what your current role is, the typical first response is, who do you truly believe you are? You're like, okay, I'm a developer, right? But you forget that you could be a CTO or a founder or this or that. Deep down, that's who you are. And when I talk to people, when I see that the other person is that person as well, the same person, you forget the fact that they are a different human, and you sort of see yourself in them, and you start hearing what do you want to hear or what you don't want to hear, just like you're hearing it out of your own mouth. I know I said a number of words there. Hopefully some of it makes sense. But the whole context there is I'm just super excited in having this chat because I kind of knew exactly the type of items that you would touch upon, and it's going to get my, I don't know, eyes are going to light up. And the reason I don't, I asked if I could interrupt is typically I try not to. I do my best. But here it's going to be difficult because there's things that you're saying and I don't want to forget as we go, right? So I just want to interrupt you there, right? But if it hurts your train of thought, which it very well could, please let me know and just I'll keep them on shut for a while. You mentioned that in terms of a couple of things that you said there with this legacy app, right? I want to get some questions clarified at a high level, so I'm following along. You
Yeah, yeah.
mentioned a button. So I presume that was a UI repository, right? Whatever you're building
Yeah,
there.
it was React based. It was Next.js React, so not super, not like working on some old .NET type of thing.
Okay,
But we
perfect,
we
right?
had about 2 years of code into it, so
Okay,
it
React.
was
That was my
mature.
next question, right? So it's Next.js, React, and it's a UI repo, and you are trying to import that sort of into Cursor, and you're trying to see what it does, and you want to make some modifications to to the UI, right? You said you made some changes to the button, and you
Yep.
started prompting. And here's my first question to you, Mike. This is based on personal experience. Uh, as we start using these tools, I had a chat with somebody else about this as well. There comes a point where we are, at least for me, I was like, Chris, should I be thinking about solving this problem? Or should I not be doing the thinking because I'm expected to delegate the thinking to this AI agent? And I don't have a clear answer because we're all born with a certain intellect, right? I always hope I had more, but I'll take what I was born with, right? But we are born with a certain intellect and we want to put that to the use to the best of our abilities. When I use some of these AI tools, because it's early stages, at least for me, I'm not sure where I should stop thinking and where I should let the agent do the thinking for me, because your example resonated with me because sometimes I feel like I'm going on a wild goose chase where I'm like, you know what, Krish, I'm not even a developer, so don't think about how you would solve the problem. Let me use this agent and have that solve the problem for me. And then keep prompting and prodding and trying to bring the agent to how I might be thinking. And then 20 minutes later, I'm not very certain whether that approach was actually the correct approach, whether I'm doing myself justice, or whether this whole thing should be different. I mean, whatever you told me resonated in that sense. I mean, does what I'm telling you, asking here make sense? If not, I can clarify.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a question I ask myself, but it comes a little bit away. But I ask myself that all the time. Somebody says like, "Well, don't you care about the code?" And I think when I first started, I very much did. And at the same time, I was also building a Rails app that we had launched called Fin Forecasting, and I hadn't worked in Rails in many years. And I think that the AI helped me a ton because I knew how to do a lot of the things in the language that I knew, and I wanted it to help me kind of translate that into Ruby, and it helped me kind of get back up to speed really quickly. And so there was this great back and forth that I was having with the AI agent where, and then like going into a dynamic type language from a static type language, I was asking it to change things. I said, well, I want to use duck types here. I really want to leverage the dynamism of the language, and this is that comes from experience. And I don't think that the AI agent was very good at making those decisions. Like when you delegate to a developer who you hire as an export, I expect them to make more of those decisions than I expect the AI agent to make. I kind of expect the AI agent to act almost like a compiler. And I think this is what you were getting at too. And when I think about how much I care about the code it produces, do I care about the assembly that my language produces? I kind of trust that the language, like when I use Ruby, I trust that that interpreter is built as efficient as it possibly can be, and there's other people working on that. And with AI, I think that some of the friction we feel is we sort of are like exposed to the code. And so, like, if I'm editing this button and it decides to use different CSS than I would have used, is that wrong? Now, would I correct an employee in a code review and say, oh, I'd prefer you did it this way instead of, even though the result is the same? Well, as a manager, you learn very quickly that if you do that all the time, you're not going to have very happy employees, especially when you're splitting hairs over nonsense. And so I think sometimes with AI, we have to seed a little bit of these things to it in some way. And then the other side of it is, well, in terms of style and stuff, we have linters and formatters. And I think that makes the AI experience better because it's able to kind of correct itself. Like, hey, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. I want it to look this way. But I think that's a continuous battle that we're always going to have while we're exploring this space, which is, how much do I want the AI to decide? How much do I want to be involved in the decision? And where is my wisdom required? Um, and I think I just had a conversation on LinkedIn where someone said, "Oh, I think that AI is great for greenfield apps, but bad for legacy apps." And now, 6 months from that experience later, I actually kind of feel the reverse of that opinion.
I was going to say that, when you said that, I was like, I was always of the impression it's the other way around, but please go ahead. Yeah, I might have a
Yeah.
follow-up question there.
Well, my mature app, it's got the services I want, the databases I want. It's got tons of code style and a bunch of examples for the AI to like pattern match and learn from, the way a junior developer would. They're learning the style of the code base and coming up with it. I think that the AI now, especially like when I switch to Zed, it seems to just do a better job. Claude Code, I think, does a really good job of this. But with greenfield apps, I was joking with someone. I go, unless you want to build everything with Supabase and Next.js, you're really going to get the same greenfield app every time, and that doesn't always work. There are all sorts of trade-offs to make, especially now that we're using AI to help with the planning, like we're building bigger prompt documents. I see it all the time. The other day, I was like, you're using Next.js, but you're going to use TanStack query, but we have actions now. You don't have to do all of that. Get rid of that. It doesn't have the wisdom to know that. It's like combining lots of different concepts. So it's important to remember it's not thinking. It's sort of pattern matching in a way on what it knows. And it'll help you make decisions like, but you have to ask those things like, what are the pros and cons of these technologies? Like, we built this stock trading app, and it made a choice, and then I was like, wait, can you give me some other choices? And then in fact, the one I wanted was the one at the bottom of the list, was Yahoo Finance. It was good enough for the app. It was free, and we haven't had an issue with it since it launched. But it like immediately wanted to go for like the paid premium service, and which maybe makes sense to the machine for whatever reason, but it didn't have a ton of there's just some know-how that I think you're always going to need that, but you're much more of an architect. And I think a lot less about the code mechanics, how we're going to handle error. Do I want to be in a functional style or an object-oriented style? Things I used to really care about, I care a little bit less about, I would say, when it comes to building the app. I care a lot more about producing or what the end product is.
Right. So, few things there, right? I'm going to go back to what you're answering there, but let me ask something else before. The example and the scenarios that you just shared, right, Mike? Let's say you wore the hat of two different people. One is Mike, the hands-on developer CTO, and all of those examples and the experiences you shared with us. Let's say if you did the exact same thing as Mike, not so much the CTO, as Mike, the product manager, right? Or Mike, the sales engineer, right? Somebody who's not a code developer per se, but is part of, but is an integral part of the organization. Let's say you wore that hat and you had all of these interactions with these tools that you mentioned, be it Cursor, be it Zed. Do you think that experience, where I'm going with this is, the way I'm looking at solving problems, engineering problems or software engineering problems with AI support, I feel like it could possibly help a non-developer or somebody with a non-development background a whole lot more, or significantly more, than perhaps somebody with a development background. Is that true, false? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that to a point it helps them. But there are still, I actually think that for the developer, it's even more helpful. So I'll disagree on that, because I think that my business partner is non-technical. I'd say more of a product person, marketing person, and he got into doing the lovable thing, and he built a little app, but then he tried to build like a more involved app, and he could not figure out why it wasn't working, and it was because he had to start making decisions that were beyond his foundational knowledge of the internet. Like he did not he's like databases, blobs, didn't know that videos and data are stored in different types of storage and what the trade-offs are. Do I want to use Mongo or Postgres? He had no concept of that. And the AI was sort of making decisions, but it wasn't hooking up the different services. It wasn't, and some of these services are notoriously difficult to work with, and for whatever reason they are. And he didn't know which ones from having worked with them. Like, I would never use this again, but I'll use this one again, and this one's good and that one's bad. And he he was unable, but he was able to get prototypes out. So I will say that people are able to get these kind of clickable prototypes out. But when it comes to deploying them in production, there are choices that need to be made that only an engineer with some architectural background is going to be able to make. Like,
No,
where to.
totally right. I couldn't agree more with you. Actually, my question, I didn't phrase it correctly. Let me ask it differently, right? But what you said there, I couldn't agree more. I don't expect, at least at this point, somebody who's not been in the space of building this and seeing it through to production in the past entirely rely on AI to help them do it. And folks who've actually shown up at our podcast, Mike, they've shared, resonated the exact same thing that you said here. But my question is a little bit different, I think. Let's say, in my example of Mike being a hands-on CTO, Mike was able to do, say, 100 things pre the advent of AI, right? Without AI support
Yeah.
and tools and agents. How much more, in terms of just a ballparkish, right? If you could do 100 things, how much more can you do today, in your opinion? Compare that to my other example there with the non-developer being able to do stuff, and you said they're able to build prototypes. Because pre-AI, people had to rely on software engineers, right? If you're a product manager who's not technical, you actually couldn't really do anything almost unless you're like, hey, Mike, can you please help me do this? But now, forget production. They're able to build something, right, using these tools, depending on how comfortable they are with one or the other, and see it through to prototyping. So if you're going to raise money or funding, you actually don't even need a developer in the team before you can build something, take it to your potential investor and say, hey, you know what, can you give me some money to see this through to fruition? So I want to get your thoughts on both of those things. One is, as a non-developer, how far can I go? A whole lot further than I could have possibly ever imagined. But as a developer, how much more do you think you can do? And I want to see the delta between the two, the standard deviation between Mike could do 100 things as a developer, now he can do 120 as an example. So there's a 20% increase. But then Krish, who's a non-developer who could never even build anything without someone's help, is now able to take it through to prototyping, which means whatever that number ends up being, and just comparing the weightages of those two equations, if you will.
Yeah, it largely depends on the type of task, but I would say, depending on the thing, it can be like at least 3 to 4 times more things for myself, but if not 5 to 10 times more things, because there are things that were notoriously annoying to do before, not necessarily hard, but like certain types of script writing and file parsing or integrating tools where you'd have to read documentation a lot, that AI just blows through because it just knows how to do it. And you can just say, yeah, if this config works, and that's great. For a non-developer, I think they also can accomplish a lot more, especially on the business side. In terms of building prototypes to raise money, I've yet to see that actually happen. People, in our experience, especially the last 3 years, you can't just raise money with a prototype. Like, you have to have made $1 to raise it. And the argument I make to people is, if you were able to build that as a non-technical person in 2 days, 3 days, why is anyone going to pay you for that? Why wouldn't they just build the exact same thing in Lovable themselves, and then they own it and they don't have to pay you anymore? So I would say that the bar is now raised for what becomes a defensible product in the marketplace. That if it could be built that quickly with Cursor by someone with no engineering background, there's almost no reason to pay a SaaS subscription for it, or the subscription fee should be incredibly nominal, like $1 or something like that. I'm not going to pay 10 grand a month for a tool that took someone 2 days to build, or that kind of thing. I think that the other reason, and this is where a lot of my work is going towards now, is I have a ton of software that's just not greenfield. We manage clients, like, they're not going to rewrite all their code bases from scratch. So my product managers, actually, there are tasks that I see that could go from my customer success person into our PM tool to an agent, back with a staging link, and never having touched an engineer before. Because I think that that is key, but I need to integrate it into like some Ruby code base deployed to some random, like it can't just be Next.js and like it can't just be Next.js, Vercel, TypeScript. Like a lot of the apps that everyone's building with these tools are all the same stack. The apps that I work with in the real world are all different, but I do see the ability of AI to deploy and deal with all of that. So a lot of what we're building is we're building our own server environment here that allows you to edit, run through CI/CD, open a pull request, return a staging link to a product manager or to a customer without ever having touching the engineering team. And we're having a ton of success with that. And that, I would say, makes someone like, if you want to call it me, that's where that 5 to 10x comes, because things are now, and again, a lot of this stuff is still, it's supervised by me slightly, but the tickets kind of come in and they run on my machine on the side in containers so that they don't affect, because I don't want to brick my machine. I still don't trust the machines entirely, so they're still containerized. But I've got tasks running. There were days I had 3 or 4 things happening on my machine. I was focused on one, but there's another 3 or 4 happening in the background that are never really coming through me, other than to say, here's the staging link. Go check it out. Did it do what you wanted it to do? And most of the time it's true.
You know what, Mike? It's amazing. You said the bar has been it's higher, right? Which is a very, very good point, and I want to kind of delve a little bit deeper into that. Uh, uh, let's say a couple of years ago or 2 years ago, I can probably share this because we are uh, working in, or we own working in, doesn't matter the role is, we're part of companies that are reasonably small organizations, right? So the efficiency that's expected in a smaller organization, I'm not saying larger organizations don't expect that level of efficiency. I know we've all worked in places of different sizes, but in my experience, the smaller the company or the team is, the more you generally have to do, because there's not enough people to doing whatever it is that needs to be done, right? You don't have a clear separation between a systems engineer and a software engineer, a junior versus mid versus senior versus a database
Got none of
administrator.
that.
You have to wear like 17 different hats. It's just the nature of the beast. And if anybody who's been in the business of running a company or in a small organization, they probably understand this, right? If this doesn't resonate with you, it's likely that you've only worked in larger companies where you always have somebody to help you with things that you actually don't have to worry about. But we don't have the luxury in small companies. But what has been generally true also is you never have enough money to build whatever it is that you want to build, right? You have less than what you need. You don't have nearly as much time as you need, so you're always cramped for time and money. With AI and all of these tools, and with this example that you mentioned there, Mike, where it's 3 to 5 or 10 times, it makes Mike more efficient. So it's almost like cloning like Mike 8, 9 other times. Does this mean that the size of the organization as we've looked at in the last 2 to 5 years? I'm not even talking the size of organizations in other parts of the world, and I say this because I was talking to somebody in India, and he was like, "Hey, I work for a small company." I was like, "Oh, that's cool. So how many people work at your company?" And he goes, 3,000 people. I'm like, "Wow, that's a lot of
Oh
people."
my God.
Right. That's not small at all. And he goes, "No, that's small because the other companies that are in this business have like 60,000 people." I was like, "Okay, you know what? I guess my point of reference was very different. When I thought small, I thought like 6 people, not 3,000 people, right?" So I'm talking more the sizes that we are used to, like at least in the US. A small startup that was efficient, you needed like, I don't know, I would say you had 4 people, you could seriously get stuff done, right? As simple as
Right.
that. You could build some really good, seriously good stuff done. What is that number, Mike? Is that number, and I don't want to give you a clue. I'm going to give you sort of the answer I read someplace else. What is your take? Like, if you needed 4 people to build something interesting and cool, has that changed? If it has, what is that number today?
Yeah, like for me, I think it's like we kind of have one person to a project now. Not even really. It's really one, I would say 1 to 2 people potentially. My team now, I want to say, is we've always run on a contractor basis for the most part, because we have projects come in and they come out, and so we hire to that. But increasingly, I've taken a lot more on myself, where we have maybe 3 developers total managing north of 10 to 15 projects at any given time. And special projects come in now that we previously couldn't take, and now we finish them in a day or two. And so I'm always like, you're never really blocked anymore by anything. Like I'm like, somebody needs something, most people need the same things. It's usually pretty basic. Like one of the like tooling I love is like business dashboards. They're like, oh, I want to build like a business dashboard from this data. And I'm like, done. 2 days later, I have it done, and it's not 2 full days of work, right? The cool thing is these people now can be on calls with customers, and the agents can be working while they're on the call. Like I was on a call with someone, and they were experiencing an error, and the AI had resolved the error before the call was even done. And like normally, I used to do things like style changes with clients like that on the call, but she never really did like, oh, let me handle like a production level error so it's crazy. I would say that really to ship something cool, one person can do that, especially if they're a really good engineer, because you kind of know the mechanics, but aren't a specialist. But AI makes you a specialist. Like for me, I'm not really a DevOps guy. Never really liked that. But I know enough about the hardware and DevOps game that I know what to ask, and I know when I'm not getting the right thing back, and I know kind of how to figure that out because I would have normally worked with a DevOps engineer, and now I'm like, oh well, this is kind of I need a CI/CD pipeline set up, and I want to use these things. And sometimes you forget that stuff, or if you were at a bigger company, you had an infrastructure team, a developer tooling team, just do that for you. Now you're like, all right, well, now the AI is going to do that. And then I'm going to say, show me that it works. And it shows me that it works. And now I effectively have these other roles. If I'm not very good at design, I could say, look, I like the way Material UI looks. Like I need you to get it looking like that. Move this here, pick a nice font. It can do a better job at the areas that I'm not great at. So that's where that one person thing comes in, and can help round out all of your weaker points. And if you're a very product focused engineer, which is where I consider myself and the people that we hire tend to be in that, because we need them to be able to work with the customers, you can be incredibly dangerous in this new game because I still think that people want to talk to people, and I think they want to hear that their ideas are heard, and they want to collaborate, and they want to get excited, and now you're able to build so much faster, and you're not focused on the code so much. You're really just focused on like, how do I get this to be what this person envisions? How do I build the right product? How do I have that discussion with the person with how are we going to market this? What are the first customers going to look like? All of the things that software engineers notoriously forget. And you see all over LinkedIn, like, oh, you built this great thing, but you have no customers. Like that's everybody's story, man. Like everybody. Now you can focus on getting the customers because the AI is helping you develop more efficiently. Unfortunately, the getting of the customers and the marketing is not the fun part, and it's brutal.
Not even close, right? Not even close.
It's the worst job.
You said a number of really interesting things there. Let's talk a bit more about some of those things. So your number that you answered, the one person, was not only the correct answer, but honestly, that's the answer I was even expecting. Right? I was like, no, Mike is not going to say three people. He's going to definitely say one. And I'll tell you, I might have heard this recently or read this. I think it was the Anthropic founder or co-founder. I like that guy so much that no matter, even if he doesn't say something, a lot of the things I read someplace else, I wrongly attribute that to the Anthropic co-founder, I think, because I just heard him once or twice and I've read a number of things that he said. And he seems like one of those people who's building a company that's phenomenally in the space of AI, but also at the same time talking about the other side of, what those implications might be. So I have a lot of respect for him. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name. And I think if I'm attributing the code correctly, someone had asked, how many people you think we might need to build the next $1 billion company, the unicorn, right? A product company. And it did not take him more than 4 seconds. Either it was him or whoever it is that said that was an accomplished person. They said one person, right? That was not even a joke, right? So we are talking about this in July, mid 2025, where somebody who's built this large company is actually saying to have a product company that could be a unicorn, you could potentially have a single person. Right now, maybe let's say that's even an exaggeration. But that says that you don't need 300 people. You don't need 200 people. Maybe you need 20 people, which is an incredibly small number, a number that we could not have potentially fat them like even a year or two ago. Now keep that on one side, Mike, right? So that's
Mhm.
something I read recently. On the other side, again, I forget the name of this gentleman, but he was sitting next to Dr. Lisa Su, the CEO of AMD, and there was a question from the audience where they were like, "Hey, you know what? I hear this thing about software developers losing jobs. We don't need these developers anymore. AI can do just about everything. So coding is not something we should learn." And I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but his answer was phenomenal. I expected no less from somebody who was sitting next to Dr. Lisa Su, but that said, despite that, what he said was, he quoted a few examples of when COBOL was going out of fashion or something along those lines. I believe there was some talk about, oh, you know what, there's this newer, nicer languages, so we don't need as many people in the industry to build software that we actually might have needed when COBOL was the core programming language. But he's like, no, that wasn't true. We needed more and more people. There's a lot more engineers today than there were before. So if anyone's telling you, stop learning coding, stop understanding how the whole mechanics of building software works, then that's potentially wrong advice, right? Now, I'm telling you these two things where on one side, you need one person potentially to build a unicorn, $1 billion company. On the other side, someone just as respectful says, you probably cannot be not learning coding. Now, they could be mutually exclusive things, but I do see a relationship there, Mike. But I just want to get your thoughts on both of these items. So how do you see that?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So let's think. So this is how I view it. It's very interesting that you talked about COBOL and there being less engineers. I've always said to people, the way my brain works, I was not like a math major in or math kind of person growing up. I was more history, English. I view software more as someone once told me that some people view software as literature and other people view it as math. And I always kind of viewed it a little more as literature because that's how my brain works. And I've always been better at working with people, which is why I've always worked as more of a forward deployed engineer, a UI engineer, a front end engineer, because I think that I bring that to the table. I credit the development of dynamic programming languages with my ability to be a programmer. Um, I met a guy once who programmed on punch cards in the Empire State Building. That would not have been me. That's I don't think that would have been not for me at all. I see people who know assembly language, and what's interesting is as I grew as an engineer, I did later learn assembly and the data structures and the algorithms. I learned that later because you had to bypass certain barriers. It doesn't mean that I ever had to write assembly, but I had to learn it because I had to get a better understanding of what I was working with at a higher level. And I still believe that's going to be true, just the way we still learn basic math and Pythagorean theorem and all this stuff in school because it teaches us how to think. I think that learning programming languages in an academic sense is going to still be important. I got paid to learn to program because there were so few programmers when I got into it. I got in doing front end engineering, HTML and CSS. It was kind of like this ugly stepchild. Real computer science people didn't want to touch it. And people who were not computer science people weren't really, I don't want to touch code. And I kind of wedged myself in there and got paid the whole time I learned. And it was this golden era that happened in like the early 2000s all the way through I want to say 2020 and then the boot camps came, and now front end and all of that is actually reasonably complicated, and I don't think that's the case anymore. So I actually think going to school for computer science can be very helpful as long as they're teaching the right things and learning to handwrite code. While you're not going to get paid to do it like I did, it's going to help you get better results out of these tools and understand what they're doing. And at some point in your career, you will run into a code problem where you're like, I think I just broke the compiler. Like, I think I broke something that's foundational, and my understanding of it is holding me back. And I think that's going to happen even with AI, but more people are going to be allowed to program now. More people can use this machine because it's open to more brain types. And I think that early programming, going back to those punch cards, was open to a very specific type of brain type that was purely analytical, very mathematical. You think about von Neumann and those guys that were like the early founders of computing, I'm just not on that level. That's not me. But I think that as the machine is kind of opening up to more people, AI or AI driven development opens this up to everyone. But just like my founder or my co-founder ran into problems, I said, well, now you have a choice. Do you want to go deeper and grab some books and learn some programming and figure out why Lovable can't produce what you want to produce? Or were you only interested in getting rich? And that was and that was it. And that's where the buck stops, and you don't want to dive any deeper. And so that goes back to the idea of the bar being raised too. I think it's going to be very hard unless you kind of, there was a guy who made this website years and years ago called shipyourенemiesglitter.com. And it was just like some nonsense where you could put someone's address in and ship them an envelope full of glitter. And there was like, all right, this guy made a ton of money and it ended up making him miserable. He had to shut the whole thing down because it was like all these people were doing it and it just fell apart on him. I said, there are apps like that where like I built this thing in 3 seconds with Lovable and I got really lucky and now I'm a billionaire. That will not be you. I have a very firm like saying in my core. I'm like, you are not going to get lucky. So don't look at ideas like that. The ideas that are going to work will take less people, like we were saying, in the future, but they are going to be harder to build because now that a lot of these little ideas are commoditized, things like, oh, I made an entire career out of building, maybe someone made a whole career out of building, financial dashboards. Well, now anybody could make a financial dashboard with a spreadsheet. So that's no longer a SaaS product. But what are you offering beyond that? What could you offer that they're not thinking of? And to think that all of computing is just somehow done, like as a founder of a software company, there is so much software that I wanted to build. I have a notebook full of ideas that there was never been enough time or money in my life to build. Then now a little tiny sliver of that is can be chipped. I can build a few more ideas, and that's great. And so I don't think we have any shortage of things that the computer can be applied to, and that software can be applied to. We're just going to have different business models crop up. And I think SaaS, maybe it won't be dead, but the price is going to be greatly reduced. People are going to be less willing to pay tons and tons of money for CRM systems and things like that, where they were getting truly annihilated on the user costs and things like that. So I think that's going to change quite a bit too.
Amazing, Mike. Amazing set of points here. So I'm going to give you a break by talking for a few minutes and then getting your thoughts on it. But everything you've said there, perfectly said. I'll start with the paraphrasing something I think Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, had said recently. I think someone asked him, if there's going to be a need for engineers and developers. The same the questions that have been asked all the time the last many months. And I think I'm going to paraphrase what he said. So please definitely look him up on the exact wording. But I think my takeaway was he had said that if humanity ceases to be creative, then there could be a problem, right? If we don't know what new problems we can potentially solve. At least that was my quick takeaway from the 2 minutes I spent reading that blurb there, which was an amazing. I mean, not because he's the CEO of the largest company. Sometimes you take a liking to somebody even when they were not so popular, right? So I've liked Jensen Huang even many years ago before NVIDIA has been the biggest company. So anything that he says, you're like, you know what? I'm always curious to know, what that person as a human, not as an accomplished, successful CEO says, but just as like as like one of us, if you will, as an engineer might say. And I think he said, if you cease to be creative, maybe that could be a problem. At least that was my takeaway from what he had said. And a number of things that you said there. Let me sort of share a few things that I did recently and get your thoughts on it. I took a piece of code. I can't remember which language. We are a polyglot shop, so we use Golang and a few other languages. I don't remember the language, but I went into one of our repos. Mike took a random piece of code. It was like about 50 or 80 lines of code that we written some time ago. Ran it through DeepSeek, Gemini, ChatGPT, and Copilot. Put that code in there. Said, hey, you know what? Tell me what you think. How could this be better? What are the problems? Yada, yada, yada. I mean, they are all using similar LLMs to some extent or to a large extent. So I expected there to be a lot of overlap and some variations as well. I don't exactly remember when I did this, maybe a couple of months back or so. Things change every day in this space. But what I found was actually very interesting, right? And I put out a podcast with those findings as well. Uh, I don't remember the exact. It was a couple of months back, but Mike, I'll tell you that the answers were very different between those four tools. Top most popular, if you will. Some came out well in terms of being able to review the code and tell me how it could be better, because I knew that that was a piece of code we wrote within a couple of hours. We didn't spend too much time. We had to get that into production. But I don't know with those Gemini or Copilot, one of them fell really flat, meaning it completely missed the mark. It was almost like it was looking at the wrong things and telling me the wrong things. And now I told myself, okay, Krish, if you were not a developer, you're going to use one of these tools. I don't believe we have the luxury to use four tools. You have to pay for services for all of these as well. So you're going to go with one of them and believe that that's better than you and that's smarter than you. Now, machines can be smarter than us, than a lot of us, but maybe not than smarter than all of us, not all the time. And if you don't have the background and the experience in being able to tell the difference, you're going to take what it says without a grain of salt, and that's going to be a problem. And you mentioned this, slightly differently, but exactly the same thing, right? Mike, you said, you know what, you need a developer to be able to take you through the production, and I think a lot of people do agree that that is possible. But at the same time, I cannot tell you the number of people who believe, like, you come and ask me like, oh my god, you're a developer, you're an engineer, what are you going to do next year? Because surely there isn't going to be something for you guys to do, right? You, or if even if you had something to do, you're not going to be paid as much as you're paid today, for instance, right? Because Zuckerberg says that there's going to be a lack of need for mid-level engineers at Meta, right? He's like, you know what, we're going to have, or junior engineers, right? We don't need no, I think he said we don't need mid-level engineers. So my question was, how do you then have the senior engineer 3 years from now? Because you don't have a mid-level engineer, and if you're going to get rid of everybody who's mid-level, but you do acknowledge that there's going to be a need for senior engineers, how does that work, right? Because the question was not complete, the answer was not complete. Unfortunately, people asking these questions don't have a follow-up question, because not all of them are developers, right? They just ask a question, they let these big, wealthy, accomplished, smart people have a response, which is great, but you also want to have a follow-up question, because I think everybody is human too, right? People do get it wrong. After all, Meta spent billions of dollars on metaverse, and what is it, like $400 billion, and
It
now
was nonsense.
yeah, they change course. And there's a, if you look at the graveyard for Google's products or Amazon's products, that list is rather long. So you can accept, even Bezos said years ago that they have a lot of failures. It's just that they are so big and wealthy and smart that those failures become unimportant. I mean, nobody knows how many Vision Pros Apple's even making. That thing is like a brick on your head, right? And the last time they made something creative was probably when Steve Jobs was around. Like, no offense, I like Tim Cook, but it's not the same anymore. So, you know, no matter whether you're a big company or a small company, some of us, I want to say, I'm certainly in that group of people who does not who's inspired by everybody. Like, I was inspired by an artist in Central Park yesterday. I was in New York, and I just posted something on LinkedIn really quickly saying, incredibly amazing, right? Incredibly amazing that I spent an hour there, and I'm like, you know what, I drew so much inspiration from that artist who only charged $100 for that portrait, than from somebody who could be running a multi-billion-dollar company. You know what I mean? It's inspiration comes from different places, and you take everything with a grain of salt. Just because Mark Zuckerberg is this brilliant guy, runs a $1.7 trillion company, does not mean that everything that comes out of, I mean, all respect to Mark, but I'm just saying that I don't agree that you don't have these mid-level engineers. How do you get to the senior engineer? At the same time, I don't disregard the fact that AI is going to be doing a lot of the work that we don't want to be doing, right, Mike? In other words, you mentioned this earlier. As a developer or as a CTO, there are things that you don't want to do, because it's not because it's difficult or it's not difficult. It's because it's boring, it's repetitive, and you want AI to do that. So there is this combination of things that are going to come into play. So I said a number of things there, but here is my question really there, right? My question there is, but before I ask the question, I want to summarize on things that we've kind of agreed upon here. We both agree that the team sizes are going to have to be smaller. You cannot sell a team of 10 people to, whether it's an agency, whether it's a product company, no matter what you do, we don't even believe it ourselves, right? If someone woke you up in the middle of the night and said, Mike, do you need I want you to build this. Do you need 7 people? If your answer was yes a year ago, Mike, I reckon it's not going to be yes anymore. You're going to be like, no, I don't need 7 people. Yeah, I probably need a lot fewer people, right? That we both agree on. We also agree that AI and AI agents are helping us become more productive. Your number was 10 times, which is amazing, right? You said Mike can be 10 times more productive with the use of these AI agents, which is great. We also agree that non-developers can become developers even if they don't see this through to fruition or to production. They can make a plenty of progress. Now they may not be able to raise money using a prototype because the bar has been high, has become higher, it's been raised, but it's possible for them to build this that they could not do. Those are a number of things that we do agree. But what I want to ask you here, a number of things, but the first thing is, when people have asked us as a company or me as a person, like, what is your biggest skill? I mean, I say credibility is one, but ignoring that from an engineering standpoint, I've always said it's problem solving, not programming in a certain language. And you alluded to that also, right? Now, let's take a few languages. Let's say we are polyglot shops, both of us, we are part of those organizations. Like at Snowpal, we code in Ruby, in Flutter, in Golang, uh, in TypeScript, and almost all at the same time during the course of a week, right? We almost forget when you go to fixing a bug or adding a feature, you start writing Flutter code like you would write Golang, and then you realize 3 minutes later, oh my God, this thing looks ugly. And then you recognize, okay, I'm not writing Golang, I'm writing Flutter here, right?
If
Now,
error, no.
yeah, totally, right? And the reason I bring that up, Mike, is do languages and the separation between languages become extraordinarily unimportant? I always thought they were unimportant as long as you were a good problem solving engineer. Languages didn't matter. Now, people could perceive that differently because I've been asked by somebody, say a recruiter would ask me, Krish, have you worked on this particular version of Liferay? Because that's what my client is. And when I did managed services work, that the client is looking for that particular version. And I would try to impress upon the recruiter, hey, you know what? I don't think that matters. If I've done something with Liferay, or even if not in the past, there's a 99.99% chance that I actually can help your client. And even if the client would agree, Mike, it was difficult for me to make an impression on the non-technical recruiter at the time that didn't make a difference, which I think is going to change today. But the thing I want to ask you in a long-winded manner is, how much importance do you attribute to language variations, library variations, framework variations today with AI and AI support compared to a year ago? That's my question.
Yeah, so I have always, I think I went on an exploration maybe earlier in my career where I would always, I loved learning new languages, and I was learning Go and Rust and Elm and getting real into functional programming and Haskell, and kind of like getting real into this, like, this is the right, sort of like the right way to program the languages. And as I went into my own business, though, there were so many more things that I had to consider, that my passion for the languages, no matter how great I thought Haskell was, I could not write a client's code in Haskell. I was like, I need to give them code that like a lot of people can work on, and that is going to get the job done. And that's ultimately right. And so like there's the Ruby and the TypeScripts, and these languages are successful for a reason. And I think it's mainly because they're accessible, and somewhat forgiving and easy to learn. And I think the language in general, I think it's been proven. And I think I tried to make this argument on LinkedIn recently. Someone was like, oh, TypeScript isn't as fast as other languages, so you have to pick these other whatever. And I said, people say Ruby's a dog, but look at Shopify. Like the language, you're not going to get automatic speed by picking a language, and you're not going to get automatic, like, better code. Like picking the language doesn't necessarily mean that it's fast or has a certain quality, because it may in some cases, like I've talked about the things like Elm and Rust, and like the if it compiles it runs type languages, and we could talk about those later, because I do think those might make a difference in LLM generated programming. But I think in general, if you think about the LLM as like a compiler for your language, the differences between the languages matter a lot less. And a great podcast on this was, forget it, maybe it was Software Unscripted with like David Nolan. He talked about how people built software with nothing more than if statements, and like they were all there. We have all these different language constructs for dealing with errors in Go and dealing with with option types, and how does Elixir deal with errors versus this other language. And he's like, people built code without any of that. They built software without classes. They built software without, very procedurally, and they were still successful at it. And arguably to the LLM that can just like spit code out and doesn't get annoyed by its difficulty or duplication or any of that, because it could just find it all with a regex and fix it all, that starts to matter a lot less in some respect. And the other respect is you still need to be able to work on your code without the LLM, because it is still a network request. We still get attacked all the time, and like Anthropic API goes down from time to time. I still think that it's important to maintain the characteristics of the code that ensures quality, because you never know when you're going to have to get in there and unwind the tape, so to speak, and go figure out what's going on. So, as long as the LLM can do anything fast, at least make it write quality code for humans to read. Now, there is something I have been pondering a lot about that language question, though. Does it matter? And I say on some level, no, because now I can move between 3 or 4 languages. But on another level, it's kind of cool because I've tried to learn Rust a number of times now, and I call it the infinite jest of programming languages, because there's this book called Infinite Jest that's like huge and long, and I never seem to be able to finish reading it, no matter how many times I start it. And I feel like that's like Rust for me. No matter how many times I start trying to learn Rust, I can never finish learning it. But now with an LLM, I do think LLMs could write the Rust code. And I actually know enough Rust to be able to read it and kind of reason about it. And then once it was written, I would be able to edit it in those worlds. So it might help me learn it. But there's this quality it has where the compiler is so good that it throws really good type errors. And Ruby and Python and dynamic languages don't have this quality. And I actually think that's very important for LLMs, because I love when LLMs can self-correct. And TypeScript is great because the type errors become another check that I don't have to look at. If I say, hey, you're not allowed any types, but TypeScript can still let errors in, where Rust, and if there's a front-end language called Elm that's actually really wonderful. It's got great error handling and beautiful compiler error messages. And if you gave that to an LLM, I always think, wow, how much better would it be now? Because now it can write the code, and I still come back to code that's like TypeScript, and I'm like, there's type errors here, dude. Like, why'd you tell me you were done? You're like, this isn't ready to go. And with Ruby, you don't get that at all, right? It could just like totally write a function that takes parameters that don't exist, and that could be the case. If you were able to use a language like Rust that's maybe hard to learn, verbose, but now you don't really have to write it yourself, is this giving more and more feedback to the LLM to actually produce a more correct result quicker? And then you couple that with linters and formatters, and like Go format has it, where I like opinionated languages. Again, Ruby kind of emphasizes this era of human writtenness, where there's like no format, like there's no like there's Rubocop, but there's no like standard of formatting like in Go or something. And it's like, is that maybe more optimized to the human, and the LLM, we could give them a little bit of a tougher language that's a little stricter, because we want the LLM to tell us to check the runtime behavior and to like get it right. And then if you had languages that made it get it right, and now I'm not telling a client, hey, I'm building your thing in Rust and you're never going to be able to find a developer for it. Hey, the LLM's writing Rust. Don't worry about it. Any developer with an LLM could edit this code. So the language maybe matters less in terms of what I can sell to customers, but maybe it matters more because some of these stricter typed languages that people are really passionate about might be better for LLMs, because they help us produce better results as our brains get lazier, and we're like getting in product land, right? Let's admit it. We're not really checking the code, like everyone's doing the code review, but at some point you start saying like, I got the 10x productivity. You start getting that high from all the productivity, and you're just cranking it. Do those languages get you to a better place? These are just things I ponder when I'm up at night.
To summarize that part of your thought process and my question, I have 4 quick questions for you, and then we'll go to the next topic. The 4 quick questions are: A year ago, when you were looking to hire somebody, a developer, how much, let's say you're looking for React developer or Ruby developer or Golang or Rust, doesn't matter. When you were interviewing for that position, interviewing somebody to fill that position, Mike, hypothetical position, hypothetical interview from a year ago, how much importance did you give to that developer knowing that particular language or framework or library a year ago? Let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, a 10 is it certainly mattered that they had done that work using that language and in that framework for a certain number of years. 1 means you could care less. What would that number have been?
So for me as an agency owner, it was probably more of like a 9 or a 10, because usually I'd sign a project and I need you to be up to speed on React like the day that the project is going to sign. And if you're an agency owner, I think you kind of know this, like you got to strike the deal when it comes and you got to deliver it fast. When I worked at a bigger company and we were hiring developers more like for the long term, it mattered a lot less, maybe like a 4 or 5. And I definitely hired people that didn't know, they knew the language, but maybe didn't know the frameworks that we worked in, but they were very brilliant. And I knew that over time they'd get up to speed, but I had 3, 4 months to get them up to speed.
No, makes sense, right? But let me ask you that for just let's assume the agency uh, example
Agency use
there.
case.
Yeah, agency use case, correct. Year later, today, if you were to hire to fill that position, the exact same requirements, would that number still be a 9?
Man, maybe a little bit lower. Maybe, you know what? It's interesting that you say that, because I find that when a person has a mastery of that underlying language, they are insanely effective with the AI. But when they don't, I still think you lose a significant advantage. Like let's say I took somebody who didn't know React at all and was like, hey, or maybe wasn't even a front end developer at all. That could be very difficult for them
No, I'm going to make
to.
this difficult for you, the question, even more difficult. They are a front end developer. In your example of React, maybe they're not a React developer, but they are a front end developer. Or if you took backend, maybe they didn't use that particular language. Maybe they didn't build backends using Sinatra or Rails, but they built backends, good backend systems using Golang, for instance, right? So you are presented with a candidate who actually understands the space, has solved problems, and you're convinced that they knew and they're being honest in what they're saying, but they actually have no direct experience or maybe none whatsoever with the particular language and the framework they're looking for.
If they're senior, I would lower that number for sure.
What
If
will
they
the
were more,
number be?
maybe a 6 or a 7, maybe even lower to like a 5. If they're really like if they're a programmer for a long time and they've worked maybe across 2 or 3 different languages in their career, just not the one we're using, and they've like, I would definitely feel that they understood the core concepts
Great.
enough.
Mike, that's, yeah, perfect. So, which means that tells me that's a 20% increment, right? Basically a 9 went to a 7, there's a 20% difference there, which means more people can focus on solving more complex problems. I mean, can we say this as developers, right? What are your thoughts to this statement? If I said, Mike, going forward, as engineers, as developers, we have to focus more, even more than we had done in the past, more so on improving our cognitive abilities when it comes to problem solving, and actually not pay much heed to the languages we pick in solving those problems. Can that be a statement that we could make, or is that too emphatic or too preposterous at this point of time?
No, that's definitely a statement we could make. I think I would go a step further and say if you have like really strong people skills, I would even that would be even more important, because I think that the amount of interaction you now need to have with the customer, or will be expected to have in the future, or with end users in general, is going up quite a bit. I think that we are seeing a lot of, there's going to be a lot less of this like hiring a product manager and a designer and a software engineer, and it's really going to be expected of you to be able to solve a problem given a bunch of extraneous parameters, and those are going to come to you as requirements, because AI doesn't help me if I still need the product manager and I still need the UX designer and I still need, yeah, okay, now I just got one leg of the triangle working fast, but I still have this problem of like translating everything to the developer and hoping that, that developer might translate it entirely wrong into the AI.
You
I
must
think that,
have, sorry, you
yeah.
must have seen the notes I'm making that I'm not even sharing with you, because one of your answers directly relates to one of the bullet points I made that I was going to ask you, but you actually already answered that question. So, Mike, I know you have a hard stop, right? So we have 15, say 17 minutes to go. I have a bunch of questions, and I hope we can continue this conversation. I'd love to have this chat, with you all the time. So in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to throw these questions at you, uh, as quickly as you can, right?
Okay. Rapid
So,
fire.
right, rapid fire, and then I want you to ask me some questions as well, if you have any that you want to ask me. That is, so the questions I want to ask you, some summary, I didn't jot this down necessarily, I just made notes as you went. So, what I'm going to ask you, let's start here and see how good I can do. I'm not succinct, so it's me who's going to screw up here, but thanks for your patience. First question: you Somebody's coming to you for an interview. I earlier asked you something just related to that. They have the experience in the language of the framework that you're looking to hire, but not as much, right? So they have some React and Next experience, but they have a lot of other experience in areas outside of programming. Maybe they know some sales, maybe they know some product management, maybe they've been in the business, they understand solving engineering problems outside of core engineering and development. Now, your need in filling that position has absolutely nothing to do for the next 6 months with anything else that they could bring to the table. At least you don't see that happen. How do you react to it? Is that the skill that you want them to have in the context of AI, or it doesn't matter? Please bring what I need to the table.
No, that's I tell people all the time, soft skills are kind of the thing I feel like I can't teach. So like if you have sales experience, 100% yes. The best programmers I have actually have come from industries outside of programming. 100%. I've got people who work for film industry. I've got people who've worked in parks. I've got people who've worked as writers, assistants, just like all sorts of crazy stuff. One of my favorite interview questions is always, "What is your shittiest job?" And I love for people to answer that. And I always make sure that they had one tough job. But I love when you have that people skill, because that is in such high demand and it is so hard to find.
Perfect,
So
right?
hard to find.
Okay, next. Would you, a very smart person, a product manager who's not written any code, would you hire them today to fill a development position?
No, no, I
Okay,
don't think that AI is there yet.
okay, fair enough. Um, College learning, right? Again, these are random questions, a bunch of random questions, but hopefully related. Uh, you know, I spent a lot of time in college long time ago. If I could go back, I would spend almost no time. I enjoyed my time, but how much I learned from those classes and 400 credits is a discussion for another day. But today, Mike, a college degree, a college diploma, how important is it for you when you're talking to somebody to help you with the problems that you're trying to solve, that they have a college degree?
Not important at all. I truly don't care where you went to college. I think college is good. I think learning, I think that you can actually have a good time there. I wouldn't spend all your money on it. I would try to do something affordable, and it makes you more worldly, but I don't necessarily think the college degree is required to get the job done at all.
Would this answer have been any different if I had asked this question to you a year ago?
No, no, I never really looked much at it because I
Okay.
have a college degree, but I didn't learn programming in college or anything.
Okay,
So
so which means it's not an AI. I mean, I'm trying to, so that's not
it's
an
not an AI related
AI,
thing.
no AI related. So I'm going to move on to the next one that's AI related. Hopefully, right? College learning. Even if, forget college learning, right? Like when people come to say, Mike, I want to help you build whatever it is that you're building. What are the top three skills that you would look for in them that is different from the top three skills you would have looked for in them a year ago from an AI standpoint?
Yeah, yeah. So a year ago, I would have looked at. Um, we talked about. Do you know the languages and frameworks that we're working with? Um, are you I would have looked a lot at how you kind of are able to like translate a design into code, like looking at a UX design, how you're able to turn that into and synthesize that. And then of course, like how kind of a general work ethic, responsiveness, that kind of thing. Um, Today, I still care a lot about that general work ethic, responsiveness. I care a lot more about less the specifics of the framework, but one, are you using AI? This sounds like a crazy question, but I have developers that still don't use AI, and they're just so much slower. And I don't know why they don't, but they're either resistant to it or whatever it is. But their speed is much slower, and the clients feel it and they know it.
Mike,
And
is it muscle memory where you've not done it in the past and you feel like you don't need it even though you have to be using it? I exactly know what you mean. I know people who still feel like they don't need to use this tool because they're like, yep, I've been surviving without it for like 10 years. Why do I suddenly need the tool? Missing the point and the mark entirely on that.
I think that's one piece of it, and then there's another piece that I had talked to my co-founder about, and this actually happened a few years ago. We had a developer who was very slow, very slow, and like I don't like to put pressure on people. I'm an agile person, but and they produced great code, but my God, were they slow at coding? And I kind of was sitting with them one day, and I was pairing. I said, let's just see what's going on. I don't know what's going on, and we work with a lot of different technologies. And what I had noticed was that they were more comfortable reading and writing code than they were reading English, and they were an outsource. They were living in South America, and I noticed that they anytime they had to read documentation on a service or some kind of a dev tool that they were not familiar with, it slowed them down incredibly because it was not translated to their native tongue. And I said, oh, they're more comfortable. So they were okay speaking English, not okay reading it, but they enjoyed writing code more
Ah,
than they enjoyed. And so when this comes to AI, I'm starting to notice this also. You need to be able to communicate technically well to the machine. And the better that you are at writing these specs, which are largely in English, the better results you're going to get. And I think a lot of developers, especially our international folks, are more comfortable writing code than they are writing English. And that is going to hold them
Mike, are you
back.
sure you're not seeing all the questions on my screen? I'm just kidding. You know what? I have outsourcing as the next item here. It's unbelievable. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. It's just that you're gonna think like Krish is making this up. But if I shared my screen with the notes here, I promise you it is there. Yeah.
I think, and so that's why I say that your communication skills, your now and this does
You know,
not
Mike,
mean you have to be
it's
on
rapid
shore.
fire. So we're gonna go to the next one. So that
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
which makes sense, right? So sorry, was there just to let you finish that train of thought? So how do you?
Today,
Uh, yep.
yeah, I want you to have those business analyst skills, being able to work with the like if I find out that you had a meeting with a customer and the customer like comes to me and they say, yo, I love this person, I love working with them, and they totally nailed the requirement. To me, that's what I'm looking for, much more than did you pass the code review with no comments. Like I want my customers are really excited to work with developers that they feel they're collaborating with. And I think that change though with AI, it was always like me in front. And now I'm like, no, they want you. And if you can code like right, if we can be like developing right there with them, customers love being like in the process. And I think that's really cool.
Okay, makes sense. So, which takes me, I'm going to switch the order of my questions based on your responses. My question, which is not the next one, but was further down on the list, was how important is communication? Like English, let's say English as a language, like when you're talking to people and engineers and product managers, I've had mixed opinions myself. There are times when I'm like, you know what? As long as the developer knows what they're doing and they're able to produce great code, I'm okay to make that effort in being able to understand what they're trying to say or what they're not trying to say and whatnot. But patience does sometimes wear thin when you actually close to a deadline and you have to get things done. But the question here is, how much how much importance would you have given to English as a language medium of communication in a programming standpoint a year ago when you were actually staffing and placing people within your organization compared to how much you would do it today?
Yeah, so I always did place a bit more emphasis because I think Justin and I always had this dream of really like putting the programmers in touch with the customers. But I would say that, it was probably more like a 5 or a 6, and now it's like an 8 or a 9, because we definitely had folks that didn't have strong English skills. We just kind of knew, like, we had to give them the code. We are going to be the people that stay in front of that relationship. And now we're totally like, no, we want every developer to be right from the horse's mouth and really to be able to have that
Wow, that's
collaborative
very
relationship.
interesting. So these numbers are important, and hopefully the it's going to transcribe this, and hopefully I hope it does a better job in grabbing these numbers. You mentioned 5 to 6 a year ago, 8 to 9, meaning being able to speak the language outside of the programming language has actually become many folds more important. Important, very interesting point. Okay, the next item I have here is outsourcing, right? You know, one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, one of the reasons we try to look for people outside the borders is because we can save some money in being able to build whatever it is that we are looking to build as software engineers. Now, with fewer people being needed, you said, one people, there could be one people unicorns, and we agree that we need fewer people. That how does that change the way you look at outsourcing? In other words, a year ago, if someone said you only have 1/10 of the money you actually need Mike to be able to build this piece of software, so you're going to go look everywhere else outside the borders of America to find and staff that person. Now AI is in the mix. A year later, what would your answer have been a year ago? What is it now?
Yeah, I think that's exact. So again, that's one of those questions where we always tried to hold to the stance early in our company, where we didn't want to pay people differently based on their location. So we have people that are outside of the U.S. that make as much as our U.S. developers, like that are truly amazing at their craft. That being said, that we have had customers that are like, can we outsource? Can we do this? I think that was maybe again a 5 or 6 consideration. Like now it's like an 8 or a 9, because the billable hour is just totally different now. And like I can't, like, when someone's
No,
like,
but
oh,
Mike, sorry, 8 or 9 in favor of local developers versus offshore.
no, yeah, we always favored local, but we couldn't always make it work. And because we want to always make sure everyone's paid kind of similarly um across around the world, like we really always try to do the skill based hiring. I would say that, when I say offshore, it's not really offshore, but like there are people in like the Midwest and in the southeastern United States that work for a much more reasonable salary than someone here in New York. So I'd say that we get a lot more people from around the United States. But we have a developer in Lebanon, and he makes the same as our U.S. based engineers. So we never really had this dichotomy where we would try to go to like India for like $15 an hour or something like that. The biggest reason we were onshore is time zone and communication. Our developer in Lebanon is like one of the best people to work with. He's just, but he also went to college here. I think he knows, like, he's just like a worldly dude. He's
Right.
he's very entrepreneurial, very business minded. He's got like a bunch of his own businesses on the side. He's very
So,
so
Mike, sorry. So, offshoring from an AI standpoint, does AI make you want to find people outside our borders more or less or equal?
less, for sure less. If there ever was a draw to do that, it's definitely much less, because to me, the cheaper hourly thing doesn't matter anymore, because the billable hour is no longer the unit. Like AI solves most things
No, got
in
it. Right, makes sense. No, I agree. Right. Okay. So my
it,
next
it,
sorry, go ahead.
good. Yeah, yeah. Well, with that's why I say it solves most things so quickly. So we actually want to move to more of a bounty system, which is like a totally new thing for an agency, where you get paid by the ticket and the hours are irrelevant. And like, this is how much
I'm going to need a lot more time with you, obviously, but I'm rushing,
we could go
rushing.
a little bit over. We could go a little over. I think. I
Okay,
think I can. Yeah,
but I
yeah.
want to still do it. The rapid fire is actually I'm terrible at this. You ask me a question, it'll take me 1,000 words to answer. So I'm going to put myself to test with this as well. So, but awesome, right? So my next question there, and we can certainly keep going. I want to respect the my initial take on the rapid fire and see if I'm able to even do it. So, the composition of a team, Mike, a year ago, again, like let's say I'm going to save the year ago, compare from that time standpoint, that time frame to today. The composition of a team, you needed 2 developers, a tester, a product manager, a typical sprint composition. How that has it changed today? If so, how?
Yeah, yeah. We typically have like a what we call like it's like a product. It's like a hybrid product slash project manager, who kind of is able to kind of talk with our customers, be on regular calls, and then we have an engineer. That's kind of that's kind of what happens for every team. And the software developer is expected to have some level of product skills now, and UX skills. And then sometimes we will bring in a UX person on request to do kind of just one-off designs, for certain types of features that need that kind of that level of care. But I'd say that the teams are usually two. It's like product and engineering, and that's really it. And
So has there
the
been a
pro
change from an AI stuff with the advent of AI? Has that changed, or is that the answer from last year or today?
That is that I think that's changed more rapidly with AI, in the sense that one engineer now can span many more projects. We have always, like, I eliminated testers, I want to say 3 years ago, because I found that it made the developers lazy. They didn't write their tests. And guess what? AI is much better, because now nobody has an excuse to not write your tests. Like, don't tell
Totally.
me it takes more time. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
like, yeah, you
that's
can
one
get
thing
your
you can actually almost entirely delegate. And if you're like me as a developer, I enjoy writing the code that solves the problem more than the test. The test is a necessary evil, and now you
Yep.
can have AI. So the composition of a team, Mike, hasn't changed that much in that sense.
Not too much. I think that we've eliminated a little bit of UX design a little bit more, because I think that AI kind of has done a pretty good job, especially for like greenfield apps. Most people are happy to go with like the default, so to
Okay.
speak. A developer's default used to look a lot like Microsoft, like Windows 95. Now with AI, their default looks pretty modern. So like most people are pretty happy with that. And then we're like, get the product to make some money, and then we'll do some UX work if we need.
Okay. Next question is, if I tell you, Mike, I think as a developer, it is now okay to write bad code. And hang on, let me finish there
Mhm.
because it's going to sound like a bad statement. It's okay to write bad code as long as it solves the problem. This would be the exact opposite of what I would have said 99% of my career ago. You know what I mean? Like most of
Mhm.
my career, I've said it doesn't matter that you get, it's not college work. It doesn't matter if it does the job. It needs to actually do it the way we want for it to be done. So 6 months or 3 days later, you go look back at it, you want it to be, you want to be offended by your own code and be disgusted by it because you know you could have done better, but you don't want to be hiding in shame as a developer because you wrote it so poorly, right? But that answer of mine has actually changed. I want to get your quick thought on that, which is it okay to write bad code because I can now write code to solve the problem and have AI write the code better because I did the part of the work and have AI do the rest of it? Why should I actually be bothered about or bogged down by writing good code anymore?
Well, I think that you bite, like we talked about earlier, you bite yourself a little bit, because there could be a day when you do have to edit that code, and
Oh, no,
that
no, sorry. No,
does.
what I meant is not check in, right? I'm saying I'm going to
Oh,
write bad code and then have AI fix it for me and then commit the
uh,
code and send it the pull request.
you know what? Write bad English. Let the AI write the bad code. Like, yeah, reverse that. You shouldn't start with the code anymore. I'm like, listen, start with the description and make it as vague as you want. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? I'm going to copy and paste this, just like, I don't like this button out of Slack, and I'm going to see what AI does with it. Some It performs better than most developers I've hired over the years, to be honest
Right.
with you. Like,
So
so I would.
which means we shouldn't be bogged down by, which means, Mike, does it also mean that the way we review code, which, I'm not saying we should have reviewed code poorly over the years. I've been in places where it becomes like a religious war within the team where you're focusing on the wrong things and now I don't think there should be such a case anymore because things that you don't have to even try to agree between developers, let AI make some decisions for you, so we have a third party do it. But code reviews, like if you have to say it in one or two sentences, like between a year ago and now, Mike, how do you approach code reviews given with AI in the mix of things?
Yeah, I approach, so I look for the most important things are like, are there security vulnerability? Like, is this going to touch something secure? First of all, you ask that before you even start the pull request, and if so, am I exposing something? Like is that, those are the pieces I'm very concerned with. Um, and then I kind of look at the business logic. Does the business logic make sense here, and the complexity of it? Is it, like cyclomatic complexity, that kind of stuff. Um, variable names, do those make sense? Usually AI is pretty good at that, but I look more at like, would I be able to read this in the future? Things that I've accepted more that like I probably wouldn't have, you know, back in the days, like commenting, right? Oh, the code should be clear enough without comments. AI writes tons of comments. You know what? I leave them. I'm like, if AI, if this helps the AI edit this better in the future, then I'm okay with it. And not only that, I don't necessarily mind the comments. Like sometimes it's like, oh, the comment just describes like what's beneath it. I said, yeah, but maybe if, like you said, you're coming from a different language, maybe it's nice to see, you know, and sometimes it'll leave a comment about a business requirement I put in there, or I mean, man, AI actually writes documentation right now. God forbid a developer actually wrote documentation, you know, like it's, so there are things
Absolutely.
that it does better than us. I always say just focus, like, so I'm always looking at that. Like, could I come back when I look at a pull request? I go, do I understand what's going on here? And could I come back to this and edit it if I needed to, or could another developer potentially edit it? But I get less involved in like those little things like, oh, I don't want there to be any comments, or I want you, you know, is it following the standards of that code base? Does it look like the rest of the code base? So we try and keep things looking the same. But I do make sure that like usually the linter is going to catch that. And then I also look at test coverage. Do the test cases make sense? Or is it just like, you know, sometimes the AI will do that. It'll like write mocks and test the function in such a way that it's not really testing anything. So I'll look at stuff like that,
Okay.
because I was like, I want you to test that.
I have two more rapid fire questions for you, right? In this, the next one is, what are, uh, if you had to, if let's say you graduated from college yesterday and you're looking for work today, because in a lot of our audience is also in that phase, what is one reason that you would recommend that they actually get into this field of software development, and what is one reason you'd actually tell them to look to do something else?
Yeah, yeah. Um, Man, one reason is I think it's still an incredibly exciting space. It really, really is incredibly exciting. I mean, it's the forefront. I mean, we're going through another revolution. And I know people think that it's like, it is going to be hard to get a job, but I actually don't think it's any harder to be entry level as a programmer today as it is to be entry level in any job. When I first graduated college, I couldn't get a job at all. It was 2008. I had a degree in geography, and I had a whole bunch of friends with a bunch of liberal arts degrees too, and we all were waiting tables and bartending. And I say that you should definitely take that experience, and you will use those experiences every day. So like if you graduated yesterday, I say get into this field because it's exciting, but you may not get in right away. And in the meantime, don't be afraid to take a shitty job and just work it. And especially if it's something that makes you uncomfortable. I worked at Enterprise Rent-A-Car selling the rental car insurance. That was the primary function of that job when you're walking people out to the lot. And I was so uncomfortable every single day. But it made me such a better salesperson and so much better at working with people that when it came to doing what I do today and what I think is going to be important in the age of AI, if you've been doing computer science in college, you are missing that muscle. And now you need to do your master's degree in people. And sometimes that involves doing some of these quote unquote shitty jobs that'll kind of take you out of your comfort zone. I think that'll be
Makes
really helpful.
makes What is one reason you would, let's say if I'm graduating, I've studied software engineering, let's say, but you have to discourage me in actually picking this up as a career. If you had to, what would be one reason saying, Krish, no, it's not for you?
Um, One is I think that, so I think if you're in it for the money, this is not the career. I think there was a time that was true, that you could be a mediocre engineer and still make 200 grand a year. I think that most engineers are going to probably make the same salary as like a registered nurse. I don't think most engineers that were working in tech were doing anything more valuable than a nurse or a PA in a hospital does. Arguably a lot less valuable if you're working in social media or something like that. And we were paid astronomically well. And this kind of circles back to a thing you were talking about earlier with Mark Zuckerberg and everybody saying that, oh, we're eliminating
Mike,
jobs.
I had to share my screen because you're not going to believe me. These are some quick notes that I made, and look at that last but one bullet. No room for mediocre engineers. That was what I was actually going to ask you next. So I promise you that all of these items were like,
Oh
oh my
man,
god, it's almost like you're looking at my screen. So I'm going to hide this one here. No, sorry, complete your train
that's
of thought there.
no, it's so funny because yeah, that my feeling is that these VC funded companies were inflating the salaries. And if you run a small business, you know that paying someone no less yourself, paying yourself 200 grand, no less an employee 200 grand is no small feat. And to sit here and think of how much money you have to, like, when people talk about Microsoft laying out off 27,000 people, and you're like, man, were they paying 27,000 six-figure salaries? My
Hmm.
God, the amount of money they must have. That what a titanic undertaking that sounds like. Unless you've actually ran the business and like managed the cash flow, you don't realize how incredibly inflated these salaries were. I think a lot of that is going to come down. You're still going to make a good living. Nurses and PAs and these people make good livings, but no, you're not going to, you're not
So
going
Mike,
to.
what you're saying is if you're looking to make good money and you didn't enjoy this field, which like it or not, I've shared this in many a podcast of mine, in the solo podcast I do. But I've said, I've had the pleasure of working with brilliant engineers, people who are a whole lot smarter than I could ever imagined being in my entire life. At the same time, I've worked with people, a number of people who would rather be doing something else. I've asked this to so many people. They didn't wake up thinking, wanting to write code. I actually, it was a while ago where I said, for somebody like me who respects art but is not an artist, I was mesmerized by the person who was doing a portrait yesterday, right, in Central Park. I respect artists like musicians and people in various fields of art for many reasons. One of the reasons being I don't boast any such skills. For somebody like that, I treat code as art because I don't have anything else that I could present as art. So I take the code seriously. Pre AI days, you had to become the artist who wrote good code, and you took pride in that because you didn't have an agent helping you. But I would be lying if I said that everybody I worked with shared that same feeling, because people are smart, but they wanted to do something else, right? They were like, you know what, I'm doing this because I could make money, and I'm waiting for this day to end so I could go do something else that I wanted to do. So what you're saying, Mike, is if you are that person today, you're saying that you probably don't want to pick software development as a field.
No, because it's going to be just as hard to get into as other fields will be. And I don't think it's going to be nearly as
No, but hang
lucrative to
on.
be.
I agree that it's going to be just as hard as other fields, but tell me what you think about this. I feel like the rest of the fields are going to cease to exist a whole lot sooner. Everybody that tells me, Krish, you're a developer, you're going to be unemployed tomorrow, I'm like, yep, I don't disagree. Maybe that's the case. I don't say no. But I also feel if it can come after the job of a developer and at the pace it is coming and it is doing it, which other field is safe? I don't see one. I walk out every day, I talk to people who are working in other industries. I mean, you could be a lawyer. I feel like, if you were a lawyer, if I were a lawyer, love lawyer, I mean, the field is interesting. I would possibly have to be worried too because I could find out a lot of answers. I mean, people could find out a lot of answers before they end up at a lawyer's office. Isn't that the case for a lot of other industries as well?
Well, some industries are protected by virtue of you need them no matter what. Like a lawyer, for instance, you could look up the law yourself, but you probably won't get the guts to go and self defend yourself in court, right? It's like, and even if you want a divorce, you got to or buy a house. But like, I had to do like some plumbing in my house, and I think that like plumbers are still going to be here, electricians are still going to be here. So there's all that blue
No,
collar
but wait,
type stuff.
Mike, no. Okay, here's why I'm going to disagree there. Tell me what you think. I saw a video of a guy who's actually a plumber on Instagram 3 days ago. I cannot remember which
I
part
know.
of the
I fixed
country.
my own pipe. Just that. Yeah, right.
Yeah, oh, you saw that. Okay,
I,
what do you say about that then?
No, it is. I always say that sometimes I'm particularly I'm particularly, I guess, maybe handy or have family that did that stuff. So I'm always like into it. But like for instance, like people could cut their own grass and they still pay a landscaper. You know what I mean? Like I think the price of a lot of stuff has to come down. So I think that's kind of an interesting talking point. Whereas it goes back to the developer salary thing. I think like everything was just so inflated, but now what happens is, yeah, I could watch the YouTube video and then I could buy the pipe and do what I did. But if the plumber was kind of reasonable, I probably would have let them do it. Like, so everybody's going to have to adjust their pricing. The same thing for us with art. Like we're this is like a little peek
So
over the
so
hedge,
so
but
Mike,
we're going to
sorry, but
be, yeah,
go ahead and finish that. And I have a question to ask you about the last statement you made. But sorry, go ahead and finish your
yeah.
thought there.
I think Justin and I are talking about, we're going to be the first agency in history to drop rates, and we're going to have to drop rates for existing clients, we realize, because peeking over the hedge, we can handle more volume. How do you get more volume? I need to drop the rates to be competitive in the marketplace. And a lot of developers I see that can't get jobs, like, and I've interviewed a few of them, they have very high salary requirements and the salaries just aren't there anymore. And I go, if you ran a business and you were running out of cash and you couldn't live off mom and dad, you would drop your rates. And I don't, and we have, our rates have gone like this over the years. When we have too much business, we raise the rates. When the business drops, we drop the rates. And we do this until we can fill the book, and then we start raising rates again. And everybody has to kind of be subject to these market forces. And I think that no matter what, even though I could do all this stuff myself, there's still going to be a need. And there's certain things that are just like art, right? Like doing stonemason work, not that easy to watch a YouTube video and just do it. Or like if you've ever spackled a wall, you could do it. And I've done it, and I've done a pretty good job, I'd say. But when you see someone who's like good, like I had someone who did my ceiling, they had to like rip it up to put new lights in. You can't even tell they were there. But that just takes experience, like you can't just do that from a YouTube video. So I
Okay,
think that there's still,
so
yeah.
Mike, I still have the last. This is not rapid fire anymore, but it's still
No,
in
no.
the space. But it's still in the space of rapid fire. My last question before I'm going to let you ask me something, if you want to, is, uh, oh my God, I lost my train of thought there. I had this last question. I had to ask you. I'm sure it's going to come back to me in like 2 minutes. I didn't note this down here. It was. Oh yeah, I remember. You said we have to adjust the numbers, right? People asking for too much money, and that is not going to fly. But is it not? Here is my very last question. I promise. Is it not ironic, Mike, that we are saying that we need to lower our rates because the expectations are too high at the very time when Meta is paying $200 million to hire people to fill AI positions? It's not everybody, but it's still, you never thought that an AI engineer could be paid like what a sports an athlete could be potentially paid, right? So is there a dichotomy, if that's the right word here, where on one side we are saying we got to lower rates to be more competitive, and on the other side there is this first time somebody's paying somebody 100 $200 million to fill an engineering position?
Well, in every career, right? Let's take legal. There's Johnny Cochran who got OJ off, and then there's the public defender. Like, and there's the AI, there's the people building the AI, not building with AI, and then there's like folks like a little bit of what I do is I'm more of a mechanic. And I think that like us agencies have to see ourselves a little bit more like mechanics, because I'm not building large language models and neural networks. I'm building with them. And like my grandfather was an auto mechanic, but he didn't design cars, but he made a great living fixing cars. And I think that I'm going to make a great living fixing software and fixing websites. And I think that's going to be around all the time, because people are just, even with AI, they still don't understand it. There's still the security. There's still so much that AI has to do. And all of the things that make working with AI great are historical concepts like CI/CD, testing, unit testing, um, type systems. All these things we talked about are engineering concepts that non-engineers don't understand, but they make LLMs and AI more powerful, and you are kind of the wizard that can make that work. So I think that the salary comes down, but you have to rethink how you make your money you can handle the volume. You can work 2 or 3 jobs at once. Yeah, I don't want to encourage people to do that, but
Oh,
like
I don't know if you read about the guy who did like 20
did
jobs
like
in like,
100.
yeah, or something along those lines. It popped up on my feed. I'm like, oh my goodness, yeah.
We can handle more volume. I think you have to move away. I think freelancing is going to get bigger, because developers are going to realize like, wait, I don't want a salary to just work for this one person. Like I want to win deals and put them together. And one of the things, again, like I'm working on is, for our company is a server environment that runs multiple LLMs at once and can be supervised by one engineer like myself. So that now I'm not like working on one thing at a time, just faster, but they're all working. And then my attention is being called to the things that are stuck and really need my input. And I think everybody needs to get a little more entrepreneurial in that sense, and getting better at sales is going to help you do
Okay,
this.
so
Sell
Mike,
yourself.
there are 1.7 million. I just looked up roughly number of engineers, software engineers in the US, give or take at the time of this recording. Fast forward, say 5 years, 2030, right? Let's say we're having this conversation 5 years down the road, 1.7 million engineers in the US. What do you think the number is going to be?
Let's say like I'm gonna gamble and say 5 million. I think it's gonna increase. I think that people
Wow.
are going to build a shitload more software, and it's going to become more mission critical for their companies. And a lot more people though are going to be willing to work at the local propane shop maintaining the ERP for them than they are. There's I think that you may not get at Meta or Google, but I think there's going to be a lot more of these local programmers because I think a lot of people are going to say, I have a lot of software systems. They need upgrade. Like they're going to build a lot more stuff. We're just going to get a lot more stuff built that people rely on, and and I think you're going to get a lot more mechanics, so to speak. You're going to get a lot more
Mike, that's
programmers
good to
maintaining.
know. I thought you were going to say, Krish, you're going to have to change your career. Looks like, no, I don't have to change my career. But I think, my 2 cents on that, just to add to what you said, Mike, is I couldn't agree more. I don't know whether, just let's say ballparking this number, I was going to say it is going to stay consistent, but I like your prediction where it's actually increasing. The reason I didn't think it was going to diminish is the way I see it is, when when you don't like what you do, you don't do it well enough. It's hard to do it well enough even when you like to do what you do because you're just not good enough in doing it. But if you don't like it, it's very unlikely that you're going to, at least in my opinion, they're going to be really good at what you do. Which means, given my earlier rough, not an empirical data where I worked with a lot of people who didn't like to do this but did it just for the money, and if they cannot afford to be in this business anymore because they're going to have to fall through just because you're a mediocre engineer, you just did it to get paid. Maybe there's no room for you anymore. That brings more good, intelligent, not intelligent, wrong but sorry, dedicated, committed, or people are more passionate about this business into the business. Then probably I predict the number is going to stay the same, but we're going to end up doing different things that we hadn't done in the past, right? But regardless, both of us believe that there is a demand for software engineers. People don't necessarily have to drop the ball on that and switch careers. I think that's great. I have a number of things to ask you, but probably possibly in a subsequent one where I have other, not just peripheral questions about the topics we discussed, but core questions that we didn't get into. But I want to ask you if you have any questions. I know I've been just throwing questions at you because it's easier to ask than to answer. Do you have any questions for me, Mike?
Yeah, yeah. So I want to ask you, like, I've talked a lot about how, like, I feel like our agency model has changed drastically. How is yours change? Like, do you like bouncing that back to you? Like, are you finding yourself hiring onshore more or offshore? Is your pricing model changing? How are those things working out for you guys?
Yep, I can tell you, right? So many years ago, we used to do a lot more managed services work, right? Because we were building the product, we hadn't gotten the product out in production, and we were not looking to raise money. The thing about raising money, again, this is just my opinion. As a developer, if you know how to build what you want to be able to build, your inclination to raise money is actually a lot lesser, right? I've talked to founders who are brilliant people, but they're not developers. And they've actually told me, Krish, unlike you guys, we don't have a choice. We have to raise money because I don't write code. That was pre AI days, at least, right? So they had to rely on people to write even the first line of code. So we used to do more of that work, Mike. But after we launched the first version of our first product, even as difficult as it is, I want to talk about the challenges of building and running a company and everything else that you alluded to, probably in a completely separate conversation because it's less engineering and more business. I would love to get your thoughts on it because I've had these thoughts based on my experience over the years as well. When we started doing that, we pretty much, a lot of us quit what we are doing, right? And we are just doing this full time. Now, that's an incredibly risky thing to do. But when you have plan B, I've realized all my life, plan A becomes less important. And, I got to a certain point in my career and life where I'm like, you know what? I don't even care for plan B. Either I live for plan A, I just eat 2 times a day and not 3 times a day, right? It's going to be as simple as it. I'm going to just not do things. I've not been on vacation for like 6 years, I think, right? The going to New York City is the closest that we've been on vacation. It's like a 4 hour drive, but New York's expensive. Sometimes it does actually make you feel like a vacation, but regardless. So the way things have changed for us is, I'm going to answer your question less from a managed services standpoint, more from a product company standpoint, because that's pretty much what we've been doing full time for the last many years now. uh, when we go to build something, the way we approached building that piece of product or service, Mike, was a little bit different, right? We would actually, we don't plan a whole lot, to be honest with you. Like the one of the last APIs we built was an access control API. Now, it's not like you go through a Scrum board and you're jotting down all the tickets and talking to product and taking like 3 weeks to build it. You would actually start building it on day one and then see how it goes, and then go from there, right? Typically as a product company. With pre-AI, right? You still did it as efficiently as you could. But now the way we're looking to doing it, that's why we've taken a pause, intentionally so, from building this ninth API. We know what we want to build, but we're not exactly sure how we want to go about building it. Which language to use, which framework to use, what should the approach to building that be, what LLMs to use, should we be using Bedrock, should we should we be using SageMaker, which AWS product to even consume, right? A lot of those questions that we would have answered a little bit differently a year ago, Mike, I feel like we have to find answers to them very differently today, because the reason behind this AI podcast series is very selfish, is to actually discover what is out there that we don't even know yet before we start building it. Because what we know as a product company, as a small startup, is you don't have the luxury of prototyping and then going back and redoing it in a different language or a framework. We just don't have the luxury. So when people tell me, Krish, you can prototype and then see how it goes and then redo it, we're like, no, we don't have that luxury. 9 out of 10 times, we end up picking something for prototyping that shows up in production. I promise you, right? That's not
Mm.
showing up in prototyping. Like, I know when we picked Flutter as a language for our mobile app, I actually thought we were going to prototype when we built the first 2 pages. We built the first 2 pages. We were like, you know what, building the third page is going to be a lot quicker because now we understand this framework a lot better. So we didn't use Xamarin, we didn't use Swift, we didn't use anything else that was out there. We liked Flutter. We said, you know what, we're going to bang. Yeah. Fortunately, it's still a very popular framework that people are using after 3 years of us picking that, and it was not as popular at the time. But the answer to your question, a long-winded answer, is the way we are approaching the choice of technologies, frameworks, and the way we are building the prototypes and going through our lower environments through the production, Mike, is not only changing, it's going to have to change quite dramatically. Anytime we approach the solving of a problem the same way that we did 1 year ago, I promise you, we stop doing it. We're like, oh my God, we are doing it exactly the way we did it 1 year ago, which means we are doing it wrong. We just don't know how wrong it is or why it is wrong, but we know truthfully that it is wrong. So we go back to the drawing board to see how should we be building software. So in that capacity, I try to have these conversations with a lot of people, and I know it's not just us. A lot of people are also have this anxiety, but how you react to that anxiety is different. I know companies, whether it's agencies or product companies, that I tell you, Mike, based on my experience, are doing it very, very similarly like they've done it a year ago. They might change their domain to .ai. They might use a few more OpenAI APIs to make them believe that they have become more AI ready. But at the core of what they're building, the approach, the team composition, the hiring, the staffing, the prototyping, the going up the environments from dev to test to staging to production, all of that has been quite the same, which to me is wrong. If everything about what you're doing is the same, but then you believe you have an AI domain, and then you think you actually have absorbed, just because you used a new IDE, you become an AI company. That's not true. That couldn't be any further from the truth, right? So we are at a point where we are like questioning everything we're doing, even though we have done this for a long time. After we write a line of code, after we write 100 lines of code, you're like, you know what, should I be writing it? Should I have written it differently? Should AI have written this and me have should I have corrected the code, or should I have written this and let AI agent do the work? and which AI agent do I go with, which LLM do I pick. Like you go to Bedrock and you see the list of LLMs, that thing grows every single day and it's overwhelming. I'm not even sure I should be using this or that, and we're not never convinced. So that's kind of the crossroads that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I think that people get fatigued over this stuff, which this is why I think that Claude has made such a smart move in being like, we are the best at code, because I'm not looking anywhere else. I'm like super happy with Claude Opus and Sonnet. Even Sonnet is great, that like, unless something drastically changes, I know enough now that like you can't find yourself in decision fatigue. Like I'm like, until Claude starts failing me in some major way, it is doing my clients' work at a much higher rate. So I'm like, I'm sticking with it. But some people are like, oh, you haven't tried Gemini. I go, I just haven't had a problem with Claude yet in terms of code. And then, but again, people are like, you know, it's definitely it's a difficult time. You're going to have to find the right LLM for the use case, right? Like we have a use case coming up that's like looking for legal bill, like uh, the actual legislation is the word. And we're like, maybe Grok is the right one for this because it's a little more up to date. But I think they're all going to have a little something that they do well. And these LLMs are going to have to be known for the thing that they do in order to just like end the decision fatigue. You know, like that, like there's going to be an LLM that's just like great for writers, I think. And I think that's going to be, or it'll be Claude, but it'll have like a wrapping, a branding, because people still love brand. You still need people to buy your stuff. You know what I mean? Machines don't buy from machines. You still need to follow all that classic stuff.
So which means you still, do you see a space for consulting? Like say Accenture, I don't know what their size is. Let's say they're a $200 billion company or something like that today, right? And I can imagine how much, I don't know, but I speculate that they're probably charging a lot of money for getting stuff done. Do you see the room for consulting organizations given the influx of everything we've talked about here, Mike? Because could you not hire somebody, make them full time or whatever, right? You don't have to hire 20 people, you can hire one person. Is my need to look for support outside of my company towards a consulting organization, is that going to stay consistent the way you see it, or do you see that there are going to be some headwinds in that space?
I think consulting will still be a thing. I think that smaller agencies like ours is probably going to be more bang for your buck. My assumption is Accenture and McKinsey are going to start buying those smaller agencies for their client lists because they're going to start losing deals because they're to like these younger, more nimble orgs that are embracing AI much quicker than they are. They're working with much bigger companies, etc. So I think that you're going to see a lot of M&A around smaller agencies getting bought up, and everybody, you know, I probably don't have to tell you, but the realities of running a small agency from a financial standpoint are very difficult. And the warm, cozy blanket of an Accenture behind you and not having to worry about your bank account and cash flow and earning deals, and then having access to these big enterprise RFPs may be quite appealing. But I do think consulting will get bigger because these companies, a lot of companies don't want to take on the staffing expense, the W-2, the risk, right? There's all the unemployment and the insurance and all that cost. When you hire a consultant, you kind of bring them in and you drop them, and like they could come in, do some quick work, get the team up to speed, be out. I think that the McKinseys and Accentures, though, are going to struggle in this economy because they're about to get really, really beat up by smaller freelancers and smaller shops that are very good at what they do and say, like, why do I have to give any of my money to Accenture? Like, I could just be like the guy that teaches these people. And you know, so we'll see what happens. But I think there'll be some big M&A activity around smaller agencies getting sucked up by the bigger ones as they try to liven up their brands in this new age.
Lovely. So, Mike, as we wrap this up, is there anything that we've not talked about at a high level, even if not delving deeper? But is there, amongst the list of things we've discussed, is there something you're like, you know what, we've not talked this at all, and it's obviously something we should in the discussion that deals with AI?
I I think that the other side of it is, you know, I think we've talked about quite a bit. I think, yeah, getting into like the business side of it is probably the other end, and like we could probably talk all day more about like even the deep depths of the code. But I was going to say I do have to actually go, so it's so I don't want
Perfect.
to intro another train of thought, but
Uh,
I think we should do this again because I think our opinion, I think in 3 months, we're going to be looking at something totally different. And potentially I'll have a little more demo of like what I run locally for you that'll show you kind of how we're thinking about like almost like the digital agency of the future. How does this work?
Remarkable. So I think with that, any closing comments, Mike?
Uh, I would say I always leave the closing comment is like software engineering is still a valuable profession. I think that humans will always need other humans, and just no doom and gloom. Be excited about technology. Don't think so much. Don't think about whether. Just think about doing. Use technology. Be curious. Those qualities will always. You will find something to do with your life. I should say, and it's like computer engineering. I always say found me. I was not into this as a kid. I didn't get into this in college. It sort of found me, and I fell in love with it. And if I had to reinvent myself all over again, I would find something else and fall in love with that. And you can do the same. So again, I always say don't get afraid of this stuff. Just kind of go where the wind takes you.
You know what? Thank you so much. And folks, this is Mike Rispoli, CTO of Cause of a Kind. Again, I've spoken to Mike before and his partner. Absolutely brilliant folks. So if you have a need for anything in the space of software engineering, certainly a company that you should reach out to. I'm going to include, we're going to include Mike's LinkedIn profile and a link to Cause of a Kind when we publish the podcast. And Mike, thank you so much for taking the time. I will, hit you up to do a bit more hands-on conversations the next time we get and talk more about finance as well. We've started, having podcasts in the space of finance and building something in that space as well. So it'll be awesome to have the conversation. So super appreciate your time here, Mike. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yes, me too. Thanks so much, Krish.
Until next time. Bye bye.